Marvel just broke a box office record that took 7 years to fall, and buried inside that same movie is a much quieter story that could matter more for the next decade of these films than the opening weekend number does. Spider-Man. Brand New Day pulled in $360 million domestically in 3 days. That beats Avengers Endgame's opening, a record a lot of people assumed was permanent. But while everyone was talking about Jean Grey, the Department of Damage Control, and Tom Holland's mutating powers, one actor gave an interview that fans of the comics immediately understood. Michael Mando, the man behind Scorpion, said the version of his character we just watched is, in his words, level 1. And he named exactly where levels 2 and 3 are headed. One of them is becoming Venom. Today we're going to unpack what that actually means, why it lines up with a loose thread Marvel left dangling 5 years ago, and why handing the symbiote to this specific villain might be smarter than anything the Sony Venom trilogy ever managed to do. Quick refresher, because Scorpion has had exactly one scene in 8 years of Spider-Man movies before this one. Michael Mando first showed up as Mac Gargan back in 2017's Homecoming, in a jail cell scene with Michael Keaton's Vulture. Gargan was a small-time arms dealer, mostly a tease, mostly forgettable to casual viewers. Then he vanished from the franchise entirely. No Far From Home, No Way Home. Nearly a decade of silence. Brand New Day finally brought him back, fully suited up as Scorpion, mechanical tail, and all. He gets a real fight with Spider-Man, gets a moment where he's mind-controlled by Sadie Sink's Jean Grey, and by the end of the movie he's back behind bars. On the surface, that reads like a minor subplot in a movie stacked with villains. Boomerang shows up, Tarantula shows up, Tombstone, Ramrod, an entire ninja organization called The Hand. The real antagonist turns out to be a government official played by Trammell Tillman. Scorpion could have easily been forgotten in that crowd. Except this movie just became the biggest domestic opening in history, ahead of Endgame, with a 90% critic score and a cinema score in the high 90s from audiences. When a film does numbers like that, every character in it suddenly matters more, because Marvel and Sony now have every incentive to keep building on whatever worked. And according to Mando, Scorpion was built with a much bigger plan already in mind that in an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Mando revealed he had direct conversations with Brand New Day director Destin Daniel Cretton about where Gargan goes from here. Not vague fan service talk. Actual creative conversations about adapting a specific comic storyline. Here's the line that matters. Mando described Brand New Day as level 1 of the character, said there are 2 or 3 levels of growth still ahead, and specifically called becoming Venom the character's ultimate form. He was careful to add that the decision sits with Kevin Feige and Amy Pascal, not with him, and that he has to let it go and trust the people running the franchise. That last part is worth sitting with for a second. Actors tease sequels constantly, and most of the time it means nothing. But this isn't Mando saying anything is possible in a generic press junket answer. He's naming a specific comic arc, confirming he discussed it with the actual director of the film he just finished shooting, and describing exactly how the studio's decision-making structure works. That's a different level of specificity than the usual actor speculation, and it lines up with something Mando has already hinted at elsewhere. During a Reddit AMA around the film's release, he brought up the same storyline unprompted when fans asked about his future in the role. So we have 2 separate moments, months apart, where the actor keeps steering the conversation toward the same comic book event. That's not an accident. That's a guy who knows something is at least being discussed internally. So what actually happens in the comics, and why would Marvel want to adapt it? Gargan has been Scorpion since 1964, debuting in Amazing Spider-Man issue 20, just 1 issue after he was created. For decades, that was the whole character. A scientist turned mercenary with a mechanical tail, hired to take down Spider-Man, defeated repeatedly, back in his cage by the end of most stories. Then in the mid-2000s, writers gave him a massive upgrade. When the Venom symbiote was removed from Eddie Brock, it eventually bonded with Gargan instead. This wasn't a brief cameo. Gargan wore that symbiote for years of published comics. As Venom, he first served Norman Osborn directly, working within groups called the Sinister 12 and later the Thunderbolts, essentially becoming a government-sanctioned attack dog with an alien organism fused to his body. Then it gets stranger. When Osborn formed the Dark Avengers, a team of villains disguised as heroes to fool the public, Gargan was assigned the most audacious role imaginable. He put on a version of the classic red and blue suit and impersonated Spider-Man himself, webbing and all, while the actual Peter Parker was operating elsewhere. Think about how that concept alone could work as a movie villain. Not just a monster with teeth, but a monster wearing your hero's face to the public. That version of Gargan eventually lost the symbiote by force during a crossover event called Siege, and he was pushed back into the standard Scorpion costume, more unstable and more resentful than before. Mando specifically referenced this multi-year comic arc as the one he discussed with Cretin. That's not a small Easter egg. That's a multi-film character arc hiding inside what looked like a single scene in Brand New Day. That here's where this stops being speculation and starts feeling like a plan already in motion. Back in 2021, Spider-Man No Way Home had a mid-credits scene where Tom Hardy's Eddie Brock, pulled briefly into the main MCU timeline, gets yanked back to his own universe. In the process, a small piece of the symbiote gets left behind, still sitting somewhere in Peter Parker's world. That scene caused years of fan theories. When would that symbiote show up? Who would it find? Brand New Day came and went without addressing it at all. Meanwhile, Sony's own Venom trilogy wrapped up without ever delivering the crossover fans wanted. Tom Hardy's Eddie Brock and Tom Holland's Spider-Man were teased as being in the same universe for years, and it simply never paid off on screen. That trilogy is done. There's no confirmed plan to bring Hardy back as Eddie Brock in this timeline. So picture the pieces sitting on the table right now. An abandoned fragment of symbiote, confirmed to exist inside Peter Parker's own universe. A Venom actor who isn't attached to any future project. And a freshly reintroduced villain whose actor is publicly talking about becoming Venom, with the director already in on the conversation. You don't need to be a screenwriter to see how those threads could tie together. Now, some of you are probably thinking, why not just bring Tom Hardy over properly and give us the crossover everyone wanted in the first place? Here's the case for why Gargan might actually be the better choice, not just the easier one. Eddie Brock and Peter Parker never had a real history in this timeline. Their connection was always external, built entirely around the symbiote itself rather than anything personal between the two men. Gargan is different. He already has a grudge against this specific Spider-Man. Homecoming established that Peter got him arrested and disfigured him during that arms deal gone wrong. Brand New Day just gave audiences a second confrontation between them. There's real, built-up animosity here, the kind that doesn't need an origin story episode to explain. In the comics, that resentment is actually part of what makes Gargan's Venom so dangerous. The symbiote isn't calm and philosophical the way it eventually becomes with Eddie Brock. It's angry, it's unstable, and paired with a host who already hates Spider-Man on a personal level, you get something considerably more volatile than the version audiences have already seen twice on the big screen. Giving that role to a character who's already appeared in this franchise, already has motive, and already has an actor eager to play it, is a more efficient piece of storytelling than importing a character from a separate, now concluded trilogy. There's also a practical angle. Sony gets to keep the symbiote inside the main continuity Tom Holland actually lives in, instead of trying to stitch together two separate universes that never quite lined up in the first place. If they ever do want a fresh, more traditional Eddie Brock down the line, nothing stops them from introducing one after this story plays out. So when might we actually see this? Tom Holland has confirmed there have been conversations about a fifth Spider-Man film, though nothing is officially greenlit yet. It's also still unclear whether Peter Parker shows up in Avengers, Doomsday or Avengers, Secret Wars, both of which are gathering an enormous cast from across the franchise. If Spider-Man 5 does move forward, and if Marvel wants to use that abandoned symbiote fragment from No Way Home, Gargan's arc gives them a built-in next step without needing to introduce a brand new character from scratch. Scorpion already exists in this timeline. The Grudge already exists. The symbiote already exists, sitting in use since 2021. All that's missing is the moment those pieces collide, and Mando has now told us, twice, that he's had exactly that conversation with his director. Worth noting, there's also an alternate universe version of Scorpion currently appearing in the animated series Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, with a completely different backstory than the one Mando plays. So even if this particular version never gets his symbiote arc, the character clearly has room to keep evolving somewhere in Marvel's expanding slate. None of this is officially confirmed. Kevin Feige and Amy Pascal haven't announced anything, and Mando himself was careful to frame this as a conversation, not a promise. But when an actor names a specific multi-year comic storyline, confirms he's discussed it with his director, and brings it up again months later unprompted, that's usually not random. Combine that with a symbiote fragment Marvel has left sitting in this universe since 2021, and a villain who now has both the motive and the momentum of a record-breaking movie behind him. And Gargan's path to becoming Venom starts looking less like fan theory and more like a plan waiting for its green light. What do you think? Would you rather see Gargan take on the symbiote, or would you still rather Sony find a way to bring Tom Hardy's Eddie Brock properly into this world? Drop your take in the comments. And if you want the deep dive on how the Dark Avengers storyline could translate to screen, I've got more on that coming. Subscribe so you don't miss it.